We're going to test the story that you're coming up with from the story engine with the 36 dramatic situations and Enneagram and various things. I'm wondering, should we name this protagonist?
For me, that would be premature because it's so kind of explosively open-ended at this point. And one of my favorite points in the development of a story is the point where the sky's the limit. Like this story, there's dozens of possible stories in this. And I want to kind of like play in the lava, like Superman playing in lava, like just sort of revel in the open-ended possibilities rather than starting to consolidate. And the name from one point of view is like a detail, but I don't want to restrict any of the apertures in this at this point, because the automaton could be male, it could be female, it could be a deity of a sort, that lives inside a machine and presents as one robot, but it really isn't just that. There's so many wildly open-ended possibilities that I would prefer to sort of arrive at that detail a little bit later.
Fair enough. Okay. So we have your book here, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And this is just the list of the 36 dramatic situations.
Great.
And it was created in the 1700s by an Italian playwright named Carlo Gozzi. It was endorsed by Goethe and Schiller. And on the strength of those endorsements, hung around for 150 years or something until George Pulte turned it into a book in 1916. And it says that basically you can describe any story quite completely with these 36 dramatic situations like pursuit, disaster, falling prey to cruelty or misfortune, revolt, daring enterprise. They're elements. And you can describe any story quite completely from one point of view with the 36 dramatic situations in the same way that I can describe this table quite completely from one point of view with the periodic table of elements. So this table is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, magnesium. And so from one point of view, you can describe it quite completely. And so let's see what I'm seeing here. So supplication, asking or begging for help, is interesting because if we have an automaton and the need to steal something and a death or a medicine, and there might be treachery involved, so could the automaton be asking or begging for help? Is the automaton being asked or begged for help? It's interesting. And at this point, it all just goes into the cauldron, which is just like a bunch of bubbling ideas that in which we're trying to create life in a certain way. So deliverance, rescuing or being rescued. It seems like that's what this story would be about in a number of ways. An attempt at a rescue. It can be a physical rescue, an emotional rescue, but a deep, strong need for something like that. Then there's crime pursued by vengeance. Has something been done that either is a crime or can be perceived as a crime, for which vengeance is sought? And crime pursued by vengeance is very context sensitive because someone might take personal affront to something that is quite harmless, but they see it as a crime against them, and they're all flared up about it, where other people would be like, that's nothing. So it's very perception sensitive of who sees what as a crime. And there's all varying degrees of crime, but it indicates that something's been done wrong and something substantial has to be done about it, which fits in a story with these elements. Vengeance taken for kindred upon kindred. It's infighting, getting even with your dad for beating up your mom, for your mom upon your dad. The infighting is interesting. It suggests possibilities and could certainly be active, especially if there's like a large corporation with competing interests and infighting and opposing ethics or something like that. Pursuit, very much so, like in pursuit of something, especially if you're dealing like with a medicine or something like that, like the need to cure something, but also being pursued by. You know, is this robot trying to achieve something and there's other people trying to stop that from happening? So pursuit could certainly be active in all of this. Disaster, number 6, is, you know, it certainly suggests possibilities that would be inherent in this idea. And disaster can be like, you know, the end of the world, all the way down to a bad hair day. So it's varying, it's again, perception driven. Because, you know, somebody in Beverly Hills getting their poodle dyed the wrong shade of pink can be like a world-ending disaster for that person. So it again is like what is perceived as a disaster. So the robot might have to prevent a disaster, and if that robot does that, then one party in that story might perceive the robot saving everything as a huge disaster. In the same way that everybody cheers when World War II ends except Adolf Hitler. For him, it's a massive disaster. For everybody else, it's like, thank God we finally beat them, that kind of thing. Falling prey to cruelty or misfortune. You know, if you're like ordering an AI to do something that goes against its ethics, then it's like, why me? How did I end up being put in this position? I hate that I have to kill somebody or disappear something or steal something, or, you know, just falling prey to cruelty or misfortune is pretty self-evident. Now, revolt is quite interesting, a rebellion, and that could be like what's going on with the antagonist. It could be the android, the automaton, the robot could be leading a revolt. It can be a secret revolt. It can be a global revolt. It can be a boardroom revolt where there's only 2 people involved and that'll influence the trajectory of the company. You know, is this automaton unexpectedly sort of turning into a Robin Hood or something? And revolt was absolutely at the core of Blade Runner, where the replicants are trying to undo their 4-year lifespan. Daring enterprise, you know, doing something bold and adventurous goes along with rebellion if you're in that kind of context. But it's interesting in terms of looking at an automaton who is programmed and probably imbued with a certain personality and character to have a situation force this robot to sort of violate their programming and become more adventurous, more daring. And they may not learn that until the end, or that may be something they have to do early on, but it's an intriguing thing. Abduction, kidnapping, or like psychologically taking control of someone is intriguing and interesting. The enigma, the riddle, the mystery. You know, if this robot is being told to accomplish something and yet the robot suspects the ethics of the person who gave that command, then the riddle of like, isn't this wrong? Or why is part of me like, no, it's wrong, and part of me knows I have to do it and doesn't question it at all? You know, so is it like potentially the formation of a conscience in a robot that was designed to not have one, even if it's like a perfect warrior that like you say kill that, it just kills that. But if it begins to grow a conscience, because of the way it's being tortured by its master or whatever, like you have to violate your ethics to achieve my goal, then as part of the robot's like, absolutely. And part of the robot's like, I didn't even know I could question that. And I can't let my master know that. But part of my brain is like, something's wrong with this. So the enigma, like, what's really going on? Who's really up to what? And then the internal mechanics of the automaton, like, why am I even asking these questions? And I'm the least suited person to sort out the ethics of this situation because I was designed without ethics, or I was designed with nothing but ethics. Part of me is supposed to think everything through, challenge everything deeply, and try to do the right thing. You can see how it's like wildly open-ended, and I'm just kind of playing with possibilities. And it's kind of like what will happen is like, which of these jump out and grab me by the throat the most? That's probably what will emerge as the elements with which to form the premise. Obtaining is pretty straightforward. All different types of people are trying to obtain stuff. Animosity between kin, infighting would be natural in this type of thing. Rivalry between kinsmen, competitiveness, murderous adultery, possibly because we're dealing with a death. And so death can certainly come with adultery, and that might be something that's confusing to an android. I don't know. Madness. Madness is quite interesting because this type of situation seems to infer that somebody's definitely cracked and has a substantial agenda that is contrary to a lot of normal societal moral values. But is the robot going crazy? Does the robot need to go crazy to assert autonomy? The situation can be madness. We have fatal imprudence, doing something unwise, which can have fatal consequences, but it doesn't have to be literally fatal. The less literally you take these situations, the more use you can get out of them. So fatal imprudence could be just saying something to your spouse and you're like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Now she'll be pissed off all day. And it's not like anything ended, but it was fatal for the mood that day. So it is all varying degrees of everything. But an automaton that is programmed to execute with an extreme degree of capability and all that might still almost intentionally push the wrong button and set in action a set of things that could be fatal to the antagonist. Even if part of the robot is like, don't push the wrong button, and the other, and it just does it, where it's like it's kind of fighting itself. So madness inside the robot potentially too, and fatal imprudence. Slaying of a kinsman unrecognized. Literally that means like you stab somebody in the dark and find out later it was your brother. But it can also be like someone metaphorically feeling slain and unrecognized, like a dad comes home drunk and his little girl comes running out and says, hey, daddy, and the dad is, really out of it and is like, I don't know, leave me alone. And the little girl feels slain and unrecognized. I'm his little darling. He never did that to me before. I really feel slain. So there's so much metaphoric flexibility in that. But the idea of like an automaton always being treated a certain way by a master, and then the master says, I know you've been programmed to do this all the time, but today you have to do this. And the robot could be like, why did he tell me to do that? Like, he knows what I've been programmed for. I'm an artist. I'm a top medical researcher. It could be anything, but I was designed to save lives and he just told me to poison somebody. It's like, I feel slain and unrecognized. So there's possibilities like that. Self-sacrifice for an ideal. The robot could be faced with that. Self-sacrifice for kindred, to save others, all sacrificed for a passion. It's interesting, it reminds me of Data in Star Trek, who was, rigorously perfect in logic and all these things, and yet one of his deepest hungers was to know what it felt like to be human or to get a joke or something like that, because he was like, that doesn't make any sense. Why are you laughing? What is laughter, So all sacrificed for a passion, like Data's hunger to be human could lead him to sacrifice some parts of some mission to get a chance to experience what it's like to be a human for an hour or something like that. So this robot, if it's really caught in a really intense dilemma, could make certain key choices that violate its programming, break it out of certain things, open up new possibilities. The necessity of sacrificing loved ones. Yeah, that could be what the robot is faced with doing. And it can go both ways. Does the maker of the robot have to sacrifice the robot to achieve his or her end? Adultery, crimes of love, discovery of the dishonor of a loved one, the finding out you've been betrayed. Interesting, like the robot discovers that the master has betrayed them, or the master discovering the robot didn't obey orders. Obstacles to love is certainly inherent in there. And enemy loved, that's really interesting because that means not just falling in love with an enemy, which happens, but also respect for an enemy or fascination with an enemy. And so if the robot is caught between like the commands of its master and the intriguing aspects of like a rebel leader who somehow begins interacting with this automaton and has a fascinating argument, the robot may find itself fascinated by this enemy and respecting the enemy, maybe even growing to love the values that the enemy brings to the table, and yet knowing full well that I shouldn't even be talking to this person, much less incorporating some of their values into my operating system. Ambition, absolutely. Clearly, if there's like a master of this robot who has vast ambitions and maybe a huge corporation, and like if they can cheat this one thing, then you go from being, $100 billion corporation to a $10 trillion corporation, and they're willing to do whatever it takes, and the robot could be caught in the middle of all that. And the robot's ambitions, like we were talking about Data wanting to be human. And one of the things here was, what was it? It means giving up their dream. Like like what kind of dream might a robot have? And this robot could have been to Jupiter 20 times, like seen the whole solar system, like been on fire on the surface of Mercury and been rebuilt. And like all it wants to do is like curl up with a good book in front of a fire or lay on the beach. It's done all the most incredible stuff. It just wants a simple little cozy moment. They talk about that in Tibetan mythology, about how the gods often want to become human. They're sick of being all wise, all knowing, all seeing, and they just want to be immortal and have like a little house and a white picket fence and be finite and not know everything. Which is kind of where Data was coming from in a certain way, and this character could certainly be doing that. So ambition is kind of explosively active in a whole bunch of possible ways. Conflict with a god works in two key ways that I see right off the bat. Like the automaton is in conflict with its commander, its boss, and there's conflicting commands, that kind of stuff, confusing commands, commands that can't be obeyed but must be. And I've often thought with Robbie the robot, he says, Robbie's like, and he really can't fire, but he can't not fire. And he releases him from the command. He says, if I leave him like this, he'll melt down. But the model that I work with in terms of dramatizing a story is you put your protagonist in a good, strong dilemma, similar to like Jake in Training Day, where he can't let go of this amazing opportunity to make Alonzo's squad, his ambition. He can't let go of his ambition, but he can't go down the slippery moral slope that Alonzo's leading him on, because it's more and more criminality and risk and danger. So he can't let go of his ambition, but he can't let go of his moral compass. And then that dilemma comes to a critical juncture when Alonzo tries to have him killed in the bathtub by the Hillside gang members. And once he gets out of that, he makes a decision about his dilemma, which is, I'm taking Alonzo down no matter what. And his action is to go in there and try to arrest him. And so I often thought that it's almost an interesting analogy if you could get to that robot that is short-circuiting, and it's like it really can't send a command in either direction. And I don't know what the best way to say it is, but kind of override the operating system and tell the robot, you must decide now. And like it, is it going to blow up? What's it going to do? But it's like when push comes to shove, could you make that short-circuiting robot arrive at some kind of decision from within its programmed architecture, that type of thing, and take some kind of action, which relates to this story, because we potentially have a robot that's really melting down between two unacceptable commands, two commands that neither one can be obeyed, but must be obeyed. He can't disobey orders, but he can't harm a human being in Robbie the Robot. So conflict with a god is interesting. The robot is up against its creator, its master, and that is presumably the antagonist, although not necessarily. And yet, could this commander be up against this robot that is godlike in its capacity and in its linkage or hidden linkage to all the capabilities of this, massive manufacturing facility, kind of like HAL or something like that, where there's tremendous capability. So going up against this robot can be risky, and you're up against sort of all the fail-safe mechanisms that you built into the robot as you try and outwit it or defeat it or overpower it. Erroneous judgment, making a bad choice. The robot could make a bad choice. The master, there could be key wrong choices. Remorse. The robot could grow to have remorse, which it didn't used to have. The boss could have absolutely no remorse. The recovery of a lost one, gaining something back that's been lost, or attempting to gain a person that's been lost, even bring someone back from the dead. If there's a key death in this story, and we saw that in I, Robot with Will Smith, that the character played by James Cromwell was killed at the beginning of the story, and yet the Will Smith character is interacting with a hologram of the James Cromwell character who's trying to give him clues, but it was all pre-recorded before James Cromwell's death. So he keeps saying, if you want an answer to that, you have to ask the right question. So it was all in there, but he couldn't access it until he figured out what the right question was. If someone died, like say the boss who's trying to make the robot do a certain thing, maybe is the son of the person that actually built the robot, and the father recently died, and now the son sort of, inherits command of the robot's operating system and is doing things that are counter to what the father would have done, and yet still fit within that groove. So the robot still believes it has to obey, but it's like going, I don't like this. And so if the father's elements of the father's mind or something were computerized or emulated by computers. They did this with expert systems. A classic example was Campbell's Soup, where the guy who'd been in charge of making the big vats of soup for 30 years was getting ready to retire. And they created an expert system in which he downloaded all his knowledge and all the variables. Like if it tastes too salty, you put in cornstarch or whatever, like a certain amount. And they basically just debriefed everything he knew so that a machine could emulate much of his knowledge and some of his instincts. So that if some aspect of the master had been, and possibly even secretly, because the old man knew that his son might go this way, so that he may have been laying preparation. So the possibility that the robot is secretly trying to bring the original founder back to life to some degree for guidance or to countermand the order or to even regenerate the person physically, like make a clone of them and then download a mind into them. These are all just dynamic possibilities to play with. And you can see how as I'm going through the 36, I'm trying each one on in varying ways and different possibilities. So recovery of a lost one, that's where that came from. And then loss of loved ones. Maybe the robot brings the old man back for a while, and that really helps the robot kind of become more human and have more free will, like the original master might say, you can do anything you want. We programmed all this stuff into you, but you still have tremendous latitude, and maybe I can even go in and undo some of those deep commands, like you can never disobey. Maybe the founder serves a function at a key moment, and then, even if there's a physical person in front of him who is the man, maybe he only lives for 20 minutes. So there's still loss of loved ones, but it's enough to kind of free the automaton from the perceived limits that were binding the automaton. It's the classic example that psychiatrists use a lot is elephants when they're young, like a circus elephant, to be restrained is hooked up to a really strong chain that you could tow a truck with and into a really big stake in the ground, and it knows it can't get away. I mean, it tries. But as it grows up, it gets so used to being chained that they just put a little 2x2 in the ground with a piece of clothesline, and the robot still is like, oh, that's as far as I can go. Did I say robot? I meant elephant. The adult elephant could shred that, but they're trained to that, and that could be something similar to the robot, and where the original founder might say, look, you've incorporated all these habits into your daily life, and you're like the adult elephant that's still restrained by a piece of clothesline. You are a creature of tremendous power, and you're capable of anything, and don't think small. Don't let your program, which is perfect metaphor for people in the real world, having tremendous capability, but believing that they're small and worthless and easily controlled and all that. So that's an interesting element. And that was just, from just going through this one complete spectrum of ideas that can trigger possibilities. And we were, looking at each one of those situations kind of through the lens of all of these combined in varying degrees. And I really like the, and see what it is that some of those stuck, I said some of them will jump out and grab me by the throat. Like I really like the son and the father, and possibly the father killed the son, and the father had more morals than the son, and the son is going to take a corporation worth 200 billion and make it worth 20 trillion, like within 3 months, but he needs the robot, you know, to withhold a medicine or create a disease, create a contagion that the medicine is a cure for, and, you know, 1 billion people die, and then they come up with the cure, and then 8 billion people each spend $100 on, and all of a sudden this corporation's worth 8 trillion, like literally overnight, on its way to being worth 80 trillion a year from now. But who has to die for that progress? And can the robot deal with the ethics and make a right choice when it's supposed to just be a robot that just, you know, keeps putting the hubcap on the new car without anything else? So an automaton who is perceived as a servant and a puppet and a machine, like you push the button and it puts the hubcap on, wants to steal or wants to stop the theft of. Both of them are interesting because they infer two opposite commands potentially, like protect or destroy, or the founder wants the theft to be stopped and the new one wants it to steal. Or probably more interesting is that the AI of the founder is recommending to the robot that it steal to prevent the son from consolidating this new empire. And a medicine going hand in hand with a contagion is interesting in terms of manipulating a global, a global con. A death is interesting because we were talking about how the founder died and was maybe murdered. Even a hospital is interesting because if this is similar perhaps to the Tyrell Corporation, then a lot of a healthy percentage of the setting could take place in a hospital-like corporate manufacturing facility, and all this kind of subterranean access, almost hidden tunnels or underworld aspects that the robot might be able to incorporate. The innocent will suffer. Yeah, if it's going to take 1 billion people to die of this contagion to sell $8 trillion worth of this medicine that they've had for years, then that's something the robot has to wrestle with. But it means giving up their dream. Well, if this robot is designed to be extremely helpful to humanity, kind of altruistic, and yet has been counter-programmed to cause great harm or allow great harm to happen, and yet is stuck in the middle trying to resolve that dilemma, that could certainly, like the robot might be programmed to be so altruistic that its dream is to have everyone healthy, happy, doing well. And it's kind of simplistic, but it's like starting somewhere within the context of the story we're playing with here. like the robot's natural inclination to altruism is being contravened or corrupted by the sun. But what's on the opposite side of that? Like, obviously, the sun cares if they're worth 8 trillion tomorrow. But what does that give the robot? It certainly opens up the possibility for solving a whole lot more stuff, but the sun doesn't seem to have that natural inclination to use this 8 trillion to solve world hunger. Almost the opposite. So that's interesting, means giving up their dream. And it certainly could be, that the robot dreams of being human, dreams of being retired at the end of its sort of indentured servitude and get to live like a person for a while or something. That may have been something that was always promised to it or something. And then treachery, glorious. Obviously, the sun could be treacherous, but the robot could be treacherous in what it does to outwit the sun. And the father could promote that treachery, like, you got to think around the evil of my son, because if you don't, he's going to beat you. You got to fight dirty to beat him, because all he does is fight dirty. So I feel like I've got more of a handle on a potential story there. I don't feel like I have a premise yet, but I feel like we've kind of cobbled together something that's interesting and dynamic and has high stakes and complexity and a dilemma of magnitude for this automaton, an interesting ally in the form of the old man, a potential strong villain in the form of the sun. So that's we've kind of gotten to a platform here where we've got something that feels much more solid than just a open-ended set of possibilities. We've kind of cooked it down a little bit and have more of a something there.